Stuff I Want to Say with Chad Brooks. I really think the theme for this week, at least in my life, should be the theme of waiting. I turned loose last episode a couple weeks late. Let's just call it late. I'm determined to get back on Friday track with this, and I'm still waiting for iTunes. In the podcast game, iTunes is the king we must all bow down to. And they're taking their sweet time on approval. And at this point in time, I don't think Spotify. Just when you start a podcast, start it off right, people. I should have known by now. I should have learned my lesson, but I declined to do that. So what I want to talk about a little bit today, before I want to share some other podcasts that I think you should be listening to, I want to talk about the presence of God. Now, a few months ago, I almost died. If you would like to hear the story behind that, check out the show notes, refchadbrooks.com/stuff004. And I will link to a time I talked in church about almost dying, but I almost died a few months ago. And if you want to wake up to anything, if you want to really begin determining what matters, almost die. It's a great party trick. It's a easy way and a very expensive way to lose 50 pounds as well. I'll tell you that much. But the presence of God, and there's this thing I've been thinking about. And in the podcast message that I've linked to in the show notes, one of the things I talk about is how I ended up on this weird stream when I was home recuperating for almost a month of finishing up several reading plans of scripture that I had gotten behind on or I wanted to focus on. And I'll be more explicit here than I was in that message. It was finishing a very deep reading of the book of Deuteronomy. It was just getting back into the rhythm of the daily office. And it was wrapping up a devotional read of the book of Hebrews, which is not as detailed as the Deuteronomy read was. But what I began seeing through across all of these things was multiple threads. But one of the threads that I kept reading about, specifically in the prophets, the prophet readings from the daily office, and it kept coming out in Deuteronomy more and more as well, is the attention that God's people must place on his presence. And more specifically, out of some readings in Jeremiah, what happens when the priests neglect the presence of God in their attempts to lead the people of God. So if you're listening to this and you're a pastor, pay attention. And what I began slowly discerning over these first few weeks is that the attentiveness to the presence of God is paramount, and that it is only from the presence of God that we are able to discern, that we are able to lead, and that we are able then to share with people what we believe we must be doing. And especially if you're a very pragmatically oriented person like I am, or you're an action-oriented person, or you're a vision-oriented person. In any of these ways, shapes, or things, that this presence of God is paramount. Now, the difficult thing for most of us, I honestly think, is we might have had situations in life where we have these large moments with God, where we have these big, huge things, these mountaintop moments, these summer camp feels, something like that. But what I think the majority of Christians, and I would say most pastors are included in this, is that we do not understand how to groom our life to be in a consistent position with the presence of God. Now, some of this thought actually started a year ago when I was on vacation, and my dad and I were talking about some of our favorite old dead pastors and the books that they had written and the sermons they had preached that we had heard. And one of the things that we came up with is because of the distraction of our age, so many of them, or so many of us, we do not have anywhere close to the time that they had to simply be doing the things that encourage the presence of God to be in our life. That A.W. Tozer did not have to worry about Twitter. That E.M. Bounds did not have a Facebook profile he was trying to manage. That S.M. Lockridge or any of these cats, these previous people, that Lottie Moon was not worrying about that. She had other concerns to a point that, Corrie ten Boom was more focused on the faithfulness of God than she was on her Instagram stories. All these sorts of things, like our minds, especially as leaders now, I'm kind of shifting over completely into that mode, I guess. Like this stuff I want to say is always pretty off the hook. They had so many things that they did not have to worry about that we have convinced ourselves are paramount. And that what instead happens is that we do not do the things that lead us more consistently into the presence of God in a visionary way, but also in a soul-caring way. That is extremely important, and that sort of thing matters more and more. And so that's one of the things about more and more lately is as I'm getting back into real life, just realizing I've always been obsessive over writing down what I do each day and that sort of a thing, and realizing that time has a very larger role in our life, in our satisfaction, and our happiness, and our purpose, and the way that we're feeling and doing all these things. And that waste can be a huge thing. And so that stuff I wanted to say today, really, really honestly and truly, that's what I felt like I needed to say today. Not so much of a, I didn't rant today. I'm very surprised about that. This thing had been getting a little ranty. But yeah. And so think about this. What do you have to do in your life to cultivate the presence of God? Sit down. Think about it. Look at the things like this is what I tend to do sometimes in my life is if I'm dissatisfied with this, I think back to the times when I was satisfied and I ask myself, what was I doing in that moment? And there's something about my actions during that season of life that is different from where I am at the moment I'm questioning. And I'll tell you, the thing that I have learned is that in the times that I have been satisfied or the times I feel like I am in some sort of, as my friend J.D. Walt calls it, the shalom zone, what I'm typically doing is I am reading an inordinate amount of scripture, and that I am finding myself, oddly enough, reading spiritual biographies. That is something that I've done in the past that has been just kind of consistent to the point to where I have a couple of them that I know if I reread them again, it might kind of kickstart something. And so, odd stuff, but just being open and honest here on stuff I want to say. So that's it. To begin thinking about what are the things you've been doing in your life where you felt like you've been closer into the presence of God, and what if those things became normalized? Where might you find yourself in the presence of God today? And now time for something different completely. If you've not seen Chernobyl yet, have you gone and watched this on HBO? The show finished up this past week. It is a 5-part miniseries that is trying to as truthfully and as accurately tell the story of the Chernobyl disaster in the Ukraine in the 1980s. If you've not seen Chernobyl yet, man, you really need to go see Chernobyl. The fact that it's done now will make it very easy and very enjoyable for anyone, I think, to go get that on. And then the last, there's some podcasts that I enjoy a lot. And there's a couple I just want to kind of talk about and lift up this episode. And I'll put the links to these in the show notes. But a couple things that are going on that are interesting. One, the Plain Truth podcast. It's a Holy Spirited podcast. It's with a couple of Methodist leaders, a couple of thought people. David Watson produces it, but he also has other folks that are on there with him. The Plain Truth podcast, if you're in the Wesleyan world, or if you like historical theology, it is a fantastic podcast to be listening to. I've also enjoying the Back Porch Book Club. The fellow pastor here in Louisiana, his wife is one of the folks that is putting that on, and it's really, really good. They talk about different books, and they just kind of go through and discuss, and they've done new books, they've done old books, they've done books just from completely across the way, and I'll tell you, I have really been enjoying listening to that lately. And the last that I want to bring up that I've been really loving lately, and I need to begin listening to in a more strategic way because I've just been kind of bit-bopping across the place with episodes and not realizing they're done in sequence, is this cultural moment that is coming out of Bridgetown Church in Portland and Red Church in Melbourne, Australia. And it is, y'all, it's just fantastic. I've loved listening to this show. And so all three of these shows, the links will be in iTunes as well as the other stuff we've talked about today. But as for now, I'm Chad Brooks, and this has been Stuff I Want to Say.